Welcome back, nieces and nephews, to JEWAP, which stands for Just Everything with Auntie Pookie Podcast. I'm your host, Sydney, or as many know me as Auntie Pookie. Now, happy Black History Month. Now, today we're going to celebrate Nelson Mandela. And I want to apologize in advance for butchering these names because, OMG, they are so hard to say. Mr. Nelson's first name is like Rohalial, something like that. I listened to it a million times and I still couldn't figure out how to say it. But anywho, Mr. Mandela was born into a clan, which was called Madiba, in the Eastern Cape on July 18th of 1918. Whew. His mother's name was Nankupie, and his father was Nasoki. I'm probably so saying that wrong. But anywho, his father was the principal counselor to the acting king of the Thembu people. In 1930, when Nelson Mandela was 12 years old, his father had passed away. He became a ward of Janjantaba at the Great Place in Hikazwini. Throughout the years, Nelson Mandela had the great opportunity to hear wonderful stories from his elders about his ancestors and how they were resilient during all the wars. And so he ended up having his own dream of making a contribution to the freedom of his people because they were struggling. He attended primary school in Canoe, where his teacher actually gave him the name Nelson in accordance with the custom of giving all school children Christian names. He then completed his certificate at Clerkberry Boarding Institute and went on to Helltown, a Wesleyan secondary school of some repute. He then began his studies for a Bachelor's of Arts degree at the University Colleges of Fort Hare, but did not complete the degree as he was expelled for joining in a student protest. When he ended up returning back to the Great Place, the king was very furious, and he basically told him that if he did not return to Fort Hare, he would arrange wives for him and his cousin Justice. He ended up running away to Johannesburg instead, and they arrived there about 1941. He ended up working as a security officer after meeting a guy named Walter, who was an estate agent. He then was introduced to an individual named Laser, and he started his articles through a firm of attorneys, the Wiccan, Elderman, and Sadelsky. Ended up finishing his bachelor's through the University of South Africa, and he went back to Fort Hare for his graduation in 1943. He eventually began studying an LLB at the University at Witwatersrand. Say that 10 times fast. And by his own admission, he was a poor student and left the university in 1952 without graduating. He only started studying again through the University of London after his imprisonment in 1962, but also did not complete a degree then. In 1989, while in the last month of his imprisonment, he obtained an LLB through the University of South Africa. He ended up graduating in Cape Town. He started to get into politics. He was heavily into politics in 1942, and he joined the African National Congress in 1944 when he helped to form the ANC Youth League, which is called ANCYL. In 1944, he ended up marrying Walter's cousin, Evelyn Mace, and she was a nurse, and they had 2 sons and 2 daughters. Sadly, one of his kids actually passed away when they were a little infant, and then they ended up divorcing in 1958. I just couldn't imagine losing a kid. Like, ugh. I have my own kid, and it's just like, ugh. I will go to jail for him. All right, anyways, back on topic. Mandela ended up rising through the ranks of the ANCYL, and through efforts, the ANC adopted a more radical mass-based policy, the Program of Action, in 1949. In 1952, he was chosen as a national volunteer-in-chief of the Defiance Campaign with Mr. Kakula as his deputy. I swear, these names are just as hard as reading the names in the Bible. Oh, Lord. Now, this campaign of civil disobedience against 6 unjust laws was a joint program between the ANC and the South African Indian Congress. He and 19 other people were actually charged under the Suppression of Commission Act for their part in the campaign and sentenced to 9 months of hard labor, and they were suspended for 2 years. Mandela ended up doing a 2-year diploma in law on top of his BA, and in August of 1952, he and a person named Oliver Tambo established South Africa's first Black-owned law firm in 1950. It was called Mandela and Tambo. And at the end of 1952, he was banned for the first time. As a restricted person, he was only permitted to watch in secret as the Freedom Chapter was adopted in Kipling Town on June 26th of 1955. Now, in 1956, on December 5th, Mandela was arrested in a countrywide police swoop, which actually led to the 1956 treason trial. Men and women of all races found themselves in the dock. In the marathon trial that only ended with the last 28 accused, including Mandela, they were acquitted on March 29th of 1961. And then on March 21st, going back, in 1960, police killed 69 unarmed men in a protest in Sharpeville against the pass law. This actually led to the country's first state of emergency and the banning of the ANC and the Pan-Africanist Congress, PAC, on April 8th. Mandela and his colleagues in the treason trial were among thousands detained during that state of emergency. And during the trial, Mandela married a social worker. Her name was Winnie, and it was on June 14th of 1958. They ended up having 2 daughters as well, and then they divorced in 1996. And days before that trial, Mandela traveled to an all-in-African conference to speak, which resolved that he should write to the Prime Minister requesting a national convention on a non-radical constitution and to warn that should he not agree, there would be a national strike against South Africa becoming a republic. Now, after all Mandela and his colleagues were acquitted in that treason trial, he went underground and began planning a national strike for March 29th, 30th, and 31st. In the midst of everything, the strike was actually called off early, and then in June of 1961, he was asked to lead the armed struggle and help to establish the Spear of the Nation, which launched on December 16th of 1961 with a series of explosions. On January 11th of 1962, Nelson Mandela actually had another name he adopted, which was David. Last name was Motsamayi, and he actually ended up leaving South Africa during that time. So he traveled around Africa and visited England to gain support for the armed struggle. He received military training in Morocco and Ethiopia and returned to South Africa in July of 1962. So he was definitely on the low, undercover with this other name and identity. He was actually arrested in a police roadblock outside Howick on August 5th while he was returning from one of his trips. He was charged with leaving the country without a permit and in inciting workers to strike. He was convicted and sentenced to 5 years of imprisonment. He started serving his sentence at the Pretoria local prison, and then on May 27th, 1963, he was transferred to Robben Island and returned to Pretoria on June 12th. Within a month, there was a big raid to where Mandela and some of his concubines, or comadres they would call it, were hiding out to plan stuff. They actually raided it, like I said before, and arrested everyone that was there. On October 9th of 1963, Mandela and about 10 other people were on trial for everything, and that became a popular trial called the Riviera trial. He was actually facing the death penalty, and he had a great speech for the court. He stated here, and this was on April 20th of 1964. He said, "I have fought against white domination and I have fought against black domination. I have cherished the ideal of the democratic and free society in which all persons live together in harmony and with equal opportunities. It is an ideal which I hope to live for and to achieve. But if it needs be, it is ideal for which I am prepared to die." Now, reading that statement and just thinking about it, it's like there's so many of us that just want peace and we want to be equal and we want to just live our best lives. But there's always somebody that got to be a stickler all the time. They always got to start some drama. They always got to be mad that you got a better job or you went to school. And it's just like the jealousy is mad real. And it's just terrible that we can't even have good things going, or we can't have people be equal because they be tripping. And they start wars and all this other nonsense for no reason. It's like, y'all want to end all of the wars and all that? Be friendly. Help each other. Ugh. But that ain't never going to happen, sadly. But anywho. So on June 11th of 1964, Mandela and 7 other people who he was working with, they were all accused and convicted, and the next day were sentenced to life imprisonment. Whew, terrible. And one of his comadres, they called them, he was actually sent to a different prison because he was white. Just terrible. And then in 1968, Nelson Mandela's mother had passed away, and his oldest son actually passed in 1968, and he was not allowed to go to any of their funerals. That's one thing I wish the system would change, is even though a person commits a crime, like, if their family would like to, give them the opportunity to go to a funeral to say bye to a loved one so that they can have their last goodbye. Because, of course, missing out on that time while they're in jail really, really sucks, or in prison. But giving them the opportunity to mentally do certain things so that it can help them, you know what I'm saying? It can help them just get through their prison sentence, especially if they have life in prison. Ooh, man. But after Nelson Mandela returned to prison, he actually had just came from prostate surgery. He was held alone. And the Justice Minister, Kobe, visited him in the hospital. And he initiated and was able to get more meetings from the Justice Minister. On August 12th of 1988, he was taken to the hospital where he was diagnosed with tuberculosis. After more than 3 months in 2 hospitals, he was transferred on December 7th, 1988, to a house at Victor Verster prison near Perel, where he spent the last 14 months of his imprisonment. He got released February 11th, 1990, 9 days after the unbanning of the ANC and the PAC, and nearly 4 months after the release of his remaining comadres. Mandela immersed himself in official talks to end the white minority rule, and in 1991 was elected as the ANC president to replace his alien friend Oliver. In 1993, he and the president, F.W. de Klerk, jointly won the Nobel Peace Prize, and then on April 27th of 1994, he voted for the first time in his life. In a bit of closing, he was inaugurated on May 10th of 1994, a day before my birthday, and I was actually going to be 4 years old. He was South Africa's first democratically elected president, and on his 80th birthday in 1988, he actually married, for the 3rd time, a woman named Garcia Machel. True to all of his promises, Mandela stepped down in 1998 after being a president for 1 term. He continued to work with the Nelson Mandela Child's Fund that he had set up in 1995, and he established the Nelson Mandela Foundation and the Mandela Rhodes Foundation. Nelson never wavered in his devotion to democracy, equality, and learning. Despite all of the things he went through, he never answered racism with racism, which is such a blessing because some people do that all the time. His life was such an inspiration to all who had been oppressed and deprived, and to all who were oppressed to oppression and deprivation. He ended up passing away on December 5th, 2013, in his home in Johannesburg. I think it's really, really amazing. And I think I said this last year when I was doing the Black History Month, of all of the things people have done and all the movements that they've wanted and created. And it just seems like there's not enough power in this world for us to dominate and change, or people are just afraid to make change because they're so used to the same nonsense, getting treated unfairly and all that stuff. So I just continue to pray and hope that we can all come together and make change, even if it's just in your city, to bring people together and to let people understand that we are equals. Yes, you may be black, you may be white, you may be orange, you may be green, whatever. You may make 6 figures a year, you may not make 6 figures a year. You know, at the end of the day, if money wasn't a factor, where would people mentally be? You know, where would they see themselves as a status? You know, it'll go into the, oh, we own 8,000 cows and blah, blah, blah. But Money literally makes people change and makes them feel a whole bunch different. But also, again, going back to racism, people feel some type of way that they're more superior than others, when at the end of the day, we are literally all the same shades of the rainbow. We're just a shade darker or a shade lighter. You know what I'm saying? So, with that being said, shout out to Nelson Mandela and anybody that worked with him. All of the lives that he has touched and more lives that he is going to touch in the future. I pray that we continuously keep him in the realm of our history so that people know that no matter what, keep fighting hard for what you believe in. And again, remember, never use racism with racism because it ends terribly. Thanks for tuning in. Happy Black History Month.